Hey, world history. This is Miss Corey. Welcome to U10-L5 Intro to the Incas. Look at that. My slideshow background is llamas. Very fitting for today's subject. So, learning targets analyze the factors that led to the emergent and expansion of the multi ethnic Aztec and Inca empires in the Americas. Today, we are going to be talking about the Incas specifically. You're going to watch this video. Any question that is in blue text are going to be questions that I want you to answer directly on the Edpuzzle. Anything in red text is going to be a vocab word, so make sure that you are following along with your study guide. First question: what do you know about the Inca Empire? All right, there might be a few things you think of. Maybe you think of llamas, like my slideshow. You might also think of conquistadors. This is Pizarro. We'll talk about him at the very end. He was a Spaniard who conquered the Inca Empire. You might also think of this here. I won't say what it is. It's called quipu, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. I won't spoil anything. You might also think of very famous Incan leaders. This is Pachacuti right here, the statue. You may also think of Machu Picchu. That is a very famous Incan city that is built upon a mountain and is a big tourist populate destination today. So here's our timeline. We saw this a few lessons ago. So we talked about the Olmecs last time. We also talked about the Mayans and the Aztecs. Now we're going to talk about the Incans. So the Incans were from about 1438 to 1533 CE, and they ruled from northern to southern Andes mountains. Today, that would include parts of modern day countries like Peru, Chile, Ecuador, Bolivia, Argentina, and Colombia. And just a good thing to note, I spell Inca with a C, but it also can be spelled with a K. So here's a map. This is a modern day map. We can see this is South America right here. Here's Peru. That's really kind of the heart and soul of the Incan Empire. It's located in what is modern day Peru, but it also stretched to places like Ecuador, Chile, and Argentina. Here's more of a zoomed in picture of where the Incan Empire was. So it stretches as far north as parts of southern Colombia, into Ecuador, down through Peru, down into parts of Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. So you can see it really runs on this coastline with the Pacific Ocean. So by 1525, the Incans had a population of about 6 million. To put that in perspective, that's about the population of the state of Minnesota today. They were a pastoralist people, meaning that they raised llamas and alpacas. Llamas and alpacas were very important because they provided food as well as clothing, which would be like their wool, and transportation. So, one thing that a lot of people kind of tend to forget about like North and South America before Europeans came was that there were no domesticated horses, camels, donkeys, cows in the Americas before the Europeans. So, the Incas, they gained power and land through their military strength, but also their trade routes. So, merchants and traders, they would use llamas and alpacas to move their supplies and goods. So, the more llamas and alpacas they had meant more trade. More trade meant more prosperity in the Incan Empire. More prosperity meant more people because more people want to live there. And then that means that the more population, the bigger military that they could have. So the Inca people farmed corn, cotton, quinoa, and potatoes. Here's a picture of quinoa if you've never seen what quinoa looks like. So there's also Peruvian cotton. Cotton's found throughout the world. This is the Peruvian variety. Here's corn. And now this is a little different than like the corn we think of today. It's typically smaller, and it comes in multiple colors. You might also think of potatoes. I know you're like, oh, what about my russet potatoes that I get from Idaho? Yeah, Peruvian potatoes come in all shapes and sizes. So these are all potatoes. So, how did the Inca get the labor force to build some of these very grand cities? So, there's two really big cities in the Inca Empire. The first one would be Machu Picchu, which would be right here. That's the one that's built on top of the mountain. The other one would be the city of Cusco. Now, the city of Cusco was the capital of the Incan Empire. And this is one of the buildings that still survive in Cusco today. And then here is an artist's rendition of what Cusco looked like in 1574. All right, the first thing we're going to talk about with the Inca is mita. So, mita, that is the labor for building large cities and road projects. And the labor force was called mita. So Mita is the labor draft of commoners. Okay. So religious cult, royals, and aristocrats were typically the ones that would own or govern the lands. The government would then draft the male commoners to either farm the land, raise and herd alpacas and llamas, make artisan goods, and to do building projects. These males would also serve as soldiers, craftsmen, and runners to carry message across roads from like city to city, town to town, stuff like that. So government building projects through MITA included things like building, like buildings and maintaining roads, making bridges such as this bridge right here, which is a 500-year-old Inca rope bridge, temples, palaces, and also irrigation canals. It wasn't just limited to building things, it also could include more textile projects, such as weaving wool and cotton, or making beer with maize, which is corn, or coca. So here is a picture of what the irrigation canals look like in the Inca Empire. So this still survives today. As you can see, that their canals went underneath like roadways, and then they would go down the mountains to provide people with fresh water, as well as to take like the dirty, gross sewer water away from the cities as well. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is Ayu. It is also related to Mita. So Ayu means clan of people. So most Inca civilizations were not living in these big cities. They were more scattered in villages and smaller cities. And all land owned within those civilizations was owned by the Ayu or the clan of people. So pretty much like the villages owned their own land collectively. So it was a close kinship between these people, and everyone was bonded like family. So in an IU, everyone had the obligation to aid each other, such as building projects, food, clothing, and other resources, and the obligation to give services and goods to the rulers. Hence why Mita was so easy to establish, because they already had like that big or like those close bonds with each other in the IUs, that Mita was more of like the big, like empire wide version of that. So each IU or community had about a seventh of its male population working for the government MITA projects at any given time. And it wasn't like it was just the same 1/7 of the males that would go off and do these projects. What would happen is that the village would be split up in like to 7 pieces among the male population, and then they would rotate who goes and helps out the government. So, commoners would also build about 13,000 kilometers of roads under Mita. So, why are roads so important to an empire? So, roads are really important because they carry things or help people transport things. So, traders and merchants, they would pack up their llamas and alpacas with goods, and then they would travel these roads from town to town, city to city. Also, it's easier to move military troops as well as government officials around the empire. So, Cuzco. Cuzco is the capital city of the Inca Empire. It is located right here, kind of towards more like the southern part of Peru. And at the height of the Inca Empire, in about 1530, it had a population of about 30,000 people. Now, I mean, that's like kind of a lot of people, right? But just to comparison, Aztecs Tenochtitlan, remember we did the Aztec videos before this? So Tenochtitlan, its capital city, had a population of about 150,000. So Cusco was significantly smaller than what the Aztecs had, but the Incan population was more based around these smaller communities versus one large city. So Cusco is really remembered by historians for being a beautiful city with buildings carved by stone masons. And these buildings were so precisely carved that the builders did not need mortar. So, mortar is kind of that stuff that you put in between bricks to kind of hold everything together. But these stones were cut so perfectly that there was no need for that. There's also the city was laid out in the shape of a puma, which you're like, what? How is that so? So here is kind of like an overview map of what Cusco would have looked like historically. You can see that the head of the puma is right there, and then you can kind of see like its feet, and then you see its tail. There's also a major temple called the Temple of the Sun, and it is believed to be lined with nothing but gold. So all the walls, all the floors, everything in it was gold. And there would have also been golden statues of llamas and corn. So next we're going to talk about Kipu. So take a look at this picture. What do you think Kipu was used as? No, I don't want any I don't knows or Googling. Just take your very best educated guess. So Kipu are cords of cotton dyed and then tied into knots. So these knots represented a way of record keeping. And I know you're like, what? Record keeping? Like we think of record keeping today, like as written, right? Like you have like a notepad, you write things down. But in the Inca civilization, it was actually all recorded on these cords. So, depending on the color of the cord, the type of knot that was made, and also the position of the knot, indicated what was being recorded. Now, the tricky part is today, historians do not know what each color and position mean. So, that is still a big mystery in history. Next word we're going to talk about is Quechua. So, Quechua is the languages of the Incas. And Quechua is still very much so spoken today. There are multiple dialects during the Inca Empire as well as today. So, when the Spanish came, the Quechua people were forced into labor by the Catholic Church. So, the Quechua people, including people from the Inca Empire, were forced to labor in farms. And what made it really, really tricky as well is that the things that the Catholic Church wanted them to farm was because were like plants that came from Europe. So these Quechua people had never seen them before. They never like know how to raise these plants. So that was very tricky. And you're probably wondering why the Catholic Church? Like, why would the church care to like force these people into farming? Great question. So when the Spanish came over to the Americas, typically they would bring priests with them. Those priests, who were part of the Catholic Church, um, would go and exploit the native populations. The Catholic Church also forced the Quechua speaking people to hand over food supplies to the Spanish and also forced the Quechua people to become Catholic, even if they didn't want to. All right, next up is Machu Picchu. So, Machu Picchu translates to Old Peak in Quechua, and it was located between two mountain peaks in Peru. And the city was made in about the mid 1400s to about the mid 1500s. And it is still a very famous city today because it was found completely intact. So it's special because it had terraced farmland, and I'll show you what that means in a couple slides from now. And they farmed things such as sweet potatoes and corn. It included plazas, temples, houses, and even a cemetery. So the reason why Machu Picchu is so famous is because it was unknown to the Spanish when they came in to conquer the Incas. Um, and Machu Picchu was abandoned about the mid 1500s. It's really unknown why Machu Picchu was abandoned, but it could have been because of the Spanish pressure and disease spreading throughout the land. But it also might be due to like a lack of water because it's really hard to get water up a mountain. So here is a big picture of what Machu Picchu looks like today. All right, now let's talk about a famous person in the Inca Empire. So Pachacuti was the Incan emperor who ruled from about 1438 to 1471. And his father was the emperor before him, but there's kind of like a weird story that goes along with it. So his father, who was the emperor, actually appointed his other son, Inca Urkon, to become the emperor. So that would have been Pachacuti's brother. Others, like the nobles, thought that the Pachacuti should be the emperor, not his brother Inca Urkon. So then there's this big civil war that breaks out. Pachacuti becomes victorious. So under his reign, he expanded into parts of southern Peru and up into northern Ecuador. So he inherited kind of the land right here in orange. He would then expand it up into parts of Ecuador, which would be in this yellowish color. He also did public works expansion, including channeling rivers, leveling the valley floor, and building agricultural terraces on the hillside. So here's a picture of what the agricultural terraces look like. As you can see, they're etched out of the hillside to make these kind of flat platforms, and then crops were grown on these flat platforms. And Machu Picchu may have been built for him, but historians don't 100% know that. So now let's talk about the Spanish coming. Now, we talked about the Spanish kind of throughout this whole slideshow, but in 1532, the Spanish conquistadors came to Peru. And the first guy was Francisco Pizarro. He was the leader. And the Spanish came about 15 or 50 years after the civil war between Pachacuti and his brother. So that really kind of set up the stage for the Inca Empire to fall because they were already weakened and divided by the civil war. So in the video U10-L6, you will learn a bit about the Spanish's superior weapons that would cause them to conquer the Inca Empire. There were also rival tribes to the Inca Empire that would team up with the Spanish because the Spanish were only about 200 men. So there were only about 200 conquistadors from Spain that came over to Peru. So they had help from some of the rival tribes that were already in South America. And through warfare and disease, they would eventually defeat the Inca Empire. So by 1572, the Incan Empire has fallen. So about 10 million people now come under the Spanish rule. So those 10 million people include the population of the Inca Empire, but also like the little tribes that are around the Inca Empire. About 7,000 Incans die in the war. And get this, 0 Spanish conquistadors die. That's crazy. All right, during this time period, it wasn't just like the Spanish necessarily like killing people with their own hands, but it was also the diseases that the Spanish brought over that killed a lot of the Incan people. So, estimated between about 20 to 25% of the Incan population died of disease. The disease that really killed a lot of people was smallpox. So, this is what smallpox looks like, and it's still around today. The present and exact numbers are widely debated among historians of how many Incans die. So 20 to 25% is just one of the guesses. So, wrap up. Today we learned about the Inca Empire, Mita, Ayu, Inca roads, Cusco, Quechua, Machu Picchu, Quipu, and Pachacuti. Next up, you're going to watch U10-L6, The Great Incan Rebellion, answer the questions, and I will be grading on what you get right or wrong, so make sure you're paying attention. All right, tune back in if you're kind of zoning out right now. So with U10-L6, I skipped over the first 20 minutes of the video, so it wasn't so much for you to watch in one class period. So in the first 20 minutes of that video that I skipped, what happened is a bunch of archaeologists and forensic scientists found evidence in a graveyard that an Inca native was shot by a Spanish bullet. And this was the first found Inca native to die from a gunshot wound. So after U10-L6, you're going to do U10-L7, Mesoamerica and South America modern day video choice. After that, there's the optional Unit 10 practice Kahoot. I highly suggest playing it. It's great studying. Then you're going to take the Unit 10 test, which is due February 23rd at midnight. And of course, if you have comments or questions or want to learn more, please let us know. We're happy to help. Bye.